we're live, and here I am with Mrs Justine Brown to talk about integralism, distributism, and her life and background before she started to want to talk about integralism and distributism. And I believe that you led a very bohemian childhood. Your parents were hippies, were they?
That's right. Yes, I grew up mostly with my mother. But my father was quite a bohemian as well. So my father's English, my mom's Canadian, but they both came to London in the '60s, and they were kind of all up and down Carnaby Street, being very involved in the sort of '60s style. And my my dad's an actor, musician, and my mother's a novelist, and they were very swept up in the kind of spirit of the '60s. And then later on, I ended up living on more than one commune in the '70s as a small child, and I would say, like, I had a real front row seat for those movements. And also my mother was very involved in '70s feminism too. She was friends, like we moved to New York City. My mother was friends with she knew some of the big name, like she was on speaking terms anyway with people like Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan, these people. Um, and
And what did you think? Did you actually meet Betty Friedan? And
I've met Betty Friedan, yeah, a couple of times.
what was she like as a person?
She's a very assertive lady. I mean, she's very. I've seen her at a lot of cocktail parties.
Was she an
She like
attractive woman?
physically, she's not especially good looking. No, she's kind of like she's sort of yeah, she's not a glamorous lady, but she makes an effort. Gloria
Mm-hmm.
Steinem, on the other hand, is kind of a classically beautiful woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember famously somebody said to her, "You don't look like a feminist, or you don't look like you're 40 or something." And she was like, "This is what a feminist looks like."
Yes.
Um,
Ugly and, um, I suppose, probably a
Bigger.
lesbian. That's what they think, isn't it?
That was their image. Yeah, I mean, she was an exception. Like, she was a Playboy bunny at one stage. um, so I had but I observed the destruction of my family and also the families of a lot of kids around me, which I attribute partly to feminism. Um, it's kind of carrying on. I don't know. It's a form. It's another form of it's kind of another form of communism in a way. But the idea that of divorce kind of started infecting the elites, I guess, and then it started, you know, percolating down. And the kind of the wealthy people, nowadays they've kind of, their family structures are not that bad, but the whole idea of sexual revolution and divorce seems to have infected all the ordinary people, and they cannot, support these things. They
Yes,
cannot, like,
your wealth would cushion you from
yeah,
broken marriages, but if you don't have that, then your life and your children would suffer. And so you'd say that what you're doing now is a reaction from the feminism that you must have imbibed in your childhood.
yeah, very much so. Yeah. Um, I, I, I mean, I think then I had like strong intuitions about the problems of feminism. I guess I had some of the basic assumptions of, like, the basic assumptions as in, well, women were very oppressed, but some of those feminists go too far. I think I was in that that camp for a while. Like
Mm-hmm.
the. Have you ever watched Karen Strawn?
Oh yes, yes, quite a few
Yeah.
times.
She described this incident once where she was talking to a journalist, and this female journalist, and the journalist like worked out that, like, not only did Karen Strawn think that third wave feminism went too far sometimes, she actually didn't think that women were oppressed, right, or had ever been oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And the woman was shocked by this. Like, what? Just a second here. So you don't just think that these current feminists are taking things a bit far. You actually don't think that women were oppressed in the past, right?
But there is
And
a
that,
way of telling, a perfectly objective way of telling which sex is being more oppressed by, I would have thought, the percentage of, male female suicides. So if things are
yeah,
bad for women, then more of them would kill themselves. If things are bad for men, then more of them would kill themselves. And we can, work on that basis, I would have thought.
yeah, we know definitely objectively that more men kill themselves. I mean, men are the ones who, yeah, of course you can make a sob story for both sexes, right? But like, objectively, men are the ones who die in war. Men are the ones who do the hard jobs. Men are the ones who struggle
Mm.
mentally more than women, who tend to be women tend to be kind of, on average, like, have more in the average intelligence, and even though women can be neurotic, I think on average they have less extreme mental illness. Like, uh,
Yes, well, we inhabit the sort of median. That's what it's called, isn't
yeah,
it? While men are mostly on, one extreme or the other. But I would have thought it's harder to be a man, just from a purely practical standpoint, being expected to pay for everything, in the olden days anyway, and also being expected to make the first move. There is this performative pressure on them.
yeah. I wonder if some people say, well, women. I think it's a fact that women are more humiliated by rejection, because we know that we're not really supposed to make the first move, and when we do, if we get rejected, we feel like we've been put down.
Yes,
Uh,
yes, because we went out of our way, but then we should observe the rules about, not asking a guy out for a date, because um,
exactly.
we should know. Well, I suppose, the female sex is actually, we do want to say and do a whole lot of stuff, but, we must know to stop ourselves, or things will go wrong for us.
Yeah, things get very bad very quickly if women don't kind of. Um, I think wait and watch is what advice that I would give to young women. I once got a good piece of advice from a lady from my grandmother's generation, which was, I said something like I wheeled out one of these standard lines that young women said at that time, which is, I think I choose the wrong men, right? And
Mm-hmm.
she said, well, darling, don't choose men at all. Wait for them to choose you and see if you like them. And I thought that's actually great. That's the kind of advice I wanted.
Yes, but how do you do that? It's like, well, don't call them, never suggest anything, or, and I know it's hard, when you're keen on the guy and
Yeah.
whatever, but that is the hardest thing to do.
I mean, you can be, it's the women who decide, like, it's women who go yes or no, right? It's men who make the actual move, but usually I think it's because they get some sort of, some of them are not great at reading signals, but, like, I think mostly women kind of let people know that.
It has to be subtle and unconscious,
Mhm.
such as, I mean, I read about this technique. I can't remember where I read it from, but yeah, I mean, the idea is that you look at the guy you fancy, you smile at him, and then when he suddenly notices you, you look away and
Look
pretend,
away, yeah.
yeah, like
Don't
you never.
stare at him, don't stare at him. I think sexual aggression in women is very it's very
Unattractive.
alarming, right? Yeah, it's
Yes.
unattractive. It is.
Yes, I mean, because men say things like, "Oh, well, I didn't know what I was expected to do. I mean, just lie back and let it all happen to me. I."
they're all of a sudden like, woo, a bit. They can be flattered, but they're usually not very happy. In my, I want to say limited experience, but maybe that's not really honest. I mean, I lived long enough to work out how things, actually work, and I noticed that I was happier, and they were happier, and everyone was happier when I was just a little bit, quite like not chasing them, letting them feel that they chose me, and that that they were the hunter, I guess. They were
Yes,
the
yes.
chooser, and also that they like to feel that they've gotten something valuable, and so they don't want somebody who's just kind of, they don't want to feel like um, that you're the kind of woman who just pursues guys all the time.
Yes.
Women don't. I don't know. Women are a lot of women are very resistant to getting this kind of advice these days. But
But surely they must know after a few. Of course they're not going to say no if you're offering them sex, but
yeah,
maybe they don't go for the second date
yeah,
after.
no, that's how it works. Like you're going to end up with, you're just going to end up feeling used, and then things, we know how things develop
And
these
then
days.
getting a certain reputation that will lower the value of yeah.
Yeah. I do think a lot of these cases that you hear about where women accuse, like on college campuses, where sometimes guys will get accused of sexual assault. And I do think that some of those cases, obviously it happens, but some of those cases are um, the woman, was aggressive with the guy, maybe, or
And
went
he said
really like,
no.
yeah, he said no, and then she accuses him of sexual assault.
Yeah, I mean,
Or
I
she,
know two men had that happen to them, and I know them, and so they wouldn't be the kind of men who would take no. I mean, who would take no
yeah,
for an answer, because they were quite shy and a bit awkward, and it's like, you were accused of rape, who by, and then, oh, this woman, she's got quite a rep, it's like, yeah.
yeah, you humiliated her, so she, or it's like it's a casual encounter, and then you weren't interested in seeing her anymore, so she then thinks back and she thinks, I was drinking that night, and basically that's rape, or I
Yes,
didn't
yes,
want,
because they have this idea that they can withdraw consent
yeah,
after the act. Because if I'd
uh,
known all the stuff I knew about you, I never would have said yes.
yeah,
And
exactly. So
therefore, you must have tricked me, and therefore it was rape.
yeah, these impossible situations, which are really contributing to, it's just another thing contributing to a lack of, family formation and so on. It's all these.
Or lack of mum giving you advice, giving daughter advice. But I suppose these days there'd be, the daughter would say, oh, but mum, the rules have changed.
Oh
What you
yeah, yeah.
learned are no longer applied to me.
And well, it's the whole modernist fallacy, right? Like that current year sort of thing. Like, it's mom, it's X year, therefore things are different. And the mums don't. A lot of mums nowadays, they don't want to seem behind the times, and so they just kind of let the children be the experts. And I think that's the thing that I object to in the hippies. One of the things that I really hold against them, without being too resentful, but it was this idea that they wanted the children to be the sort of fountains of wisdom, and that they would sit at the feet of the young and imbibe their authenticity and kind of naturalness, and that was the
We,
philosophy of a lot of these hippies. So the children,
that's what like Rousseau, isn't it? The noble savage, and yes,
exactly,
and
yeah,
and well, people's lives are so easily ruined by unwanted pregnancy and,
Yes.
underage sex and that kind of thing. Yes, I do feel that, a lot of parents actually need how to give sex education to their children. And I think the simplest ones, I suppose, is well, don't get yourself knocked up and,
Yeah.
you know.
Don't I think not having sex would be a good start for a lot of teenagers, I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
uh,
I have this thing about, well, it's chapter 24, verse 2 of the Quran that says you're going to get 100 lashes if you have babies without a marriage certificate, and that's going to happen to you if you break that rule, and that's okay, that's all you need as sex education because it's easily understood.
there's some punishment. Yeah. I mean, the old ways we had basically kids did not get left alone together, right? I
Like a
think that was
chaperone.
Yeah, chaperone, exactly. I think that's just a very basic that seems to me like basic common sense. And I think part of our problem is a breakdown of family, not like just the
Parental authority,
yeah,
I think.
and extended family as well. So if we still had bigger multi-generational families close together, you know, then we would have more people to keep an eye on the kids, which seems in the most loving possible way. This, it could be right. Or sometimes you have to come down hard, but if you have, it's part of the problem. Like sometimes people will say, "Oh, you guys just want to go back to the 50s." Well, the 50s doesn't cover it, right? Because in the 50s, you had, at least in North America, you already had a reduction of the extended family to the nuclear family, which obviously was not strong enough to support itself without the multi generations extended family. Because I
Yeah,
think you
because
really,
if maybe your mum's not good at giving,
yeah.
daughter sex education, grandma can sort of step into the breach kind of thing.
My grandmother actually was quite. She was a conservative lady, kind of temperamentally, and she did have this. Like my mother had very many attractive qualities, but she couldn't cut. And because she was a single mother, that's one big problem right there. You don't have a father to support you, to help you, with child rearing. And so she did rely on my grandmother to a large degree. And my grandmother was, she and I had a really close bond, my mother's mother. And she was, I knew instinctively what my grandmother would say
Hmm.
about, you know, um, about men.
Hmm.
And I think that did kind of help actually, because you
Yeah,
know,
because you'd already internalized her rules.
yeah, and it's not just like, oh well, that's old fashioned, or although you might have said that if you were pressed, but you kind of know, like, plus you see the proofs in the pudding. My grandmother had a successful marriage, and and four kids, um and a lovely house, and things went smoothly for her.
Hmm.
My mom had I mean, she had an exciting life, but things were very chaotic,
Hmm.
emotionally.
Hmm.
And you could just see, I just sort of know I don't want to suffer like this. This is way too hard.
Are you? I mean, at what point did you lose? Did your parents part?
I was only a baby when my parents
Right.
parted. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But I got to know my father when I was about 7.
Hmm.
Um, we did a lot of moving around. At that time, he was involved with a commune, uh, which was outside New York City, and then my mother was involved with a commune, which was a Gestalt therapy commune. So, do you know about Gestalt therapy?
I've heard of it, but I'm not sure what it is now.
So it's the type of uh, therapy. It's been quite influential. The idea
you're frozen, so I'm.
Well, you have to confront everyone. You have to be exceedingly honest, authentic, and in the therapy, they often would get like you play role reversals. So you know the therapist says, well, "Okay, you be your mother, and I'll." Beating up pillows and screaming and things like that. So, it made for a kind of wild community because everybody was in a state, all the time.
Yes.
Everyone was. And then at one stage, so originally it was founded by this couple, but then the couple broke up, and both of them were quite, as you have with often with these communes, is charismatic, and so when they split up, they were living at opposite ends of the commune, and they took half of the members went to the man and half of them went to the woman.
Wow.
So that was one episode, and then later we lived on a kind of art colony in the woods, sort of near Vancouver. So, yeah, I had my own kind of like, generational experience when I got heavily into the punk scene when I was only 13 years old, and I got like I started going to all the clubs, and I was passionately into the music, and very kind of most of my the men I consorted with were in bands and things like this.
Oh, did you play or sing?
A little bit, yeah, I did.
Oh, what did
sing.
you? Are there any recordings?
There are some. There's a what's the movie called? There is a movie about the Vancouver punk scene, and there's I should look it up. I've forgotten the name of it. It's a full-length movie, and there's some photos of me right in the opening credits. I'll look it up during the
Great. Yeah, because I was thinking of Blondie, looking at you.
Well, thank you. That's very funny. That was my sort of, that was my adolescence, but I definitely started. I started having serious doubts about this milieu when it turned out that two of the members of this guy who was in one of the most famous bands in town, and his girlfriend were members of a terror cell. Yeah.
What organization was this?
It's known by two names. One is the Vancouver Five, or the Squamish Five. Squamish is like a small, it's an Indian reservation outside Vancouver, and it was essentially they started firebombing. They started firebombing porn outlets, which, like, now I think I kind of get why I sort of don't have much affection for pornography myself, but don't support firebombing. But then they got themselves into more trouble because they attacked a military base. It was a company that made parts for these missiles, cruise missiles,
right,
which were being tested in Canada. So they were like anti-war protesters, I guess.
But with a social conservative emphasis. I mean,
no,
I think it sounds vaguely Islamist, if you don't.
I know. They were leftists, but they were feminists, right? So they attacked the porn on the grounds of left-wing feminism, and they were anarchists, I guess. Is what
right. Is there such a thing as right-wing feminism?
Is there? Good question. There's Camille Paglia. I guess she's kind of a right-wing feminist. Have you read her?
Oh yeah, yeah. I love her stuff, but
Yeah.
I think she is rejected by feminists in general, isn't she?
Yeah.
They kind of say she's not really one of us, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think feminism is fairly left-wing by definition. I mean, you couldn't I think there are a couple of oddballs around like her who make a kind of more pro, I guess she calls it like Amazonian feminism, and she says she loves men, and not physically, but she admires men.
Yeah,
Um,
I suppose that there's really only two kinds of. I suppose you could lump her in as a feminist because she doesn't agree with not having sex with anyone that isn't your spouse because she's a
yeah,
lesbian, she's
yeah,
into free
she's a
love.
lesbian. Yeah,
So,
but I
and I
don't
think
think.
that that's the thing about feminism. It's the idea of having sex with people not your spouse. That is, the distinguishing factor.
Do you think that's what I mean? You see, I see feminism. Actually, I see it as a. What is odd is there is a. I think in a way it's a reaction to the early stages of the sexual revolution, because there is a kind of more, you could say, puritanical strand in feminism. So it's not just like because, okay, say in the early sexual revolution, I'm thinking of like the 1960s, where it's like, you know, women in mini skirts, you can stick your hand up their skirt or whatever, like little babes that are, and the early feminists were to some degree reacting against that. They were they were saying like we're not sex objects. That whole thing. Do you remember
Oh
that?
yes, yes, a male chauvinist pig and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but
So
then the thing is, women do want men that they find attractive to make a pass at them. But obviously, if he's repulsive, then he's called
yes,
something else.
if the women want, yeah, like you said, the men who they find attractive to make a pass at them. If they're not attracted, then it's offensive, to them, right?
Yes, and that he's a perv, and
Then he's
yes,
a disgusting pervert. Yeah.
yes.
And women have pretty, we hear that men care about appearance and women sort of claim that they don't, but I mean, think about height. Women are very picky about a man's height, aren't they?
Yes, because it's a sign of status.
Yeah.
I had a girlfriend, and she's very petite, and so, but she still wanted a tall man, and then she left her husband, but she still wanted a tall man, and she found somebody just a bit taller than her, who was
Yeah.
neurotic about his height. And she said, I know he just chose me, because of my height, but because he's just a little bit taller than me, and it's unbearable because he's so rat-like or something. So
Oh,
quite uncomplimentary, but he was successful, but neurotic about his height.
I,
As short men tend to be, I guess.
yeah, and I get it because women are quite, that's the thing they'll specify. They'll say must be 6 feet or over, this type of thing, right? And I mean, partly it's like it's sexy because he's bigger. It's a hierarchy thing. Like you know, he's bigger than you, right? Like he's the man. He's strong. Um, there are lots for any men watching. There are lots of exceptions to this in reality. Like there are many. I think there are many smaller men who are very attractive, and I think women do find them attractive, and they'll be but
They probably have some other qualities like wealth or success or
or they're
charm or
like they have a
something.
lovely, they maybe they're like that kind of slim man who's a little bit smaller, or they're maybe they're quite well, muscular or something like that. You can't change your height, but you can go to the gym and all that kind of thing. But with men, I would give like the one piece of advice I would give to men who are you know lonely or looking for, is just it's this. I think women are really drawn to a sense of competence about something. It could even be that your driving skills are excellent. You know what I mean? It's like, but if you And that in itself is sexy. So like if you are good at, and this is why the trades I think are, should be embraced by a lot of people, like a guy who's really good at carpentry, say,
Yeah.
or is great at DIY.
Yes, come move in and put up my
Yeah,
shelves
yeah,
and
move
build me an
in.
extension.
Yeah. But but I think that, because that you can't go wrong with that, right? Like a man cannot go wrong with developing a sense of competence with things, with as much as possible, but like,
There's something a
pursuing.
woman absolutely cannot do, and that
Yes.
would just make him instantly more attractive. And
Yeah.
I think what's very unsexy is talking too much. Just hold back, or
Yes. Be
wanting
mysterious. Be a little mysterious.
yes,
That's good.
yes.
Let's see what else. I mean, I don't think you have to pay for like you don't have to you don't have to like be loaded, and you don't have to pay for everything, but just paying for little small things like a drink of coffee. I think that's just a gesture that women, I believe,
Appreciate.
yeah, they feel like or that a protective gesture is nice as well,
Yes.
like being protective, and I think back to the competence thing, that when you develop competence in something, then you feel more confident, and that is also very attractive to women. So you know, having that quiet confidence in yourself, because you know that you're good at certain things, and really liking to do certain things, and I think women really are drawn to that.
Mm, mm,
It's not like, oh, if you're not 6'2" and you don't, and
mm.
loaded, then you can't find a woman. That's not true at all. But it's just that when women go online and put a personal ad up or something, I'm using very antiquated language, I know, but they will specify things like a height. They will tend to, or they'll have like a long list of things.
Yes,
Things
yes,
that,
tall, dark, handsome, charming,
yeah,
successful, charismatic.
sensitive,
Yes.
and a whole bunch of things.
CEO,
Yeah,
preferably.
a whole bunch of things they don't actually care about as well, but they claim to care about.
Yes, all I care about is status, looks.
All I
Well,
care about is status, but I'm going to tell you that you have to be sensitive and funny and
exciting but still reliable and
reliable, yet
yes,
yet.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
But it reminds me of this idea that men want an angel in the kitchen and a whore in the bedroom. It's like, well, you can't get in the same woman. Sorry,
Yeah.
you'll just have to make your choice.
Yeah. Make your choice. Yeah. I think good marriage advice I heard also is accept, first of all, everyone is flawed, right? Everyone has imperfections, including oneself, but choose the person whose imperfections you can live with.
Hmm.
And so that you're not always trying to fix that person, but their imperfections are not a deal breaker. They
Hmm.
just, they have certain small annoying things, and you just kind of, you know you can accept those things and just not always be nagging the other
Yes.
person.
Well, yes, you have to know yourself. And one of the rules I read about, and this was in a Victorian novel, was that it's important. This is actually Anthony Trollope. I don't know if you read his
I
book.
know Trollope. Yeah, I haven't read a lot of his work, but I certainly
Well,
know.
he writes with great understanding about women, and husbands. And
Hmm.
yes, he's quite funny about that too. But he was saying that it's more important for a man to be actually in love with a woman because he's got to make the running for everything, and he can't be lukewarm about her because it won't work. He has to be in love at least from the beginning anyway.
Hmm.
But a woman can actually it would be better for her for if she felt that he loved her
Loves
more
her
than
more.
she loved him.
Yep. That he loves her a bit more. He really loves her. That.
Than she does. So she's more in control of her emotions because she, that would give her a layer of protection, and I
Yeah, I
guess,
think. Yeah, and do you agree? Do you think that's
yeah,
true?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I do think that's true. I mean, it does make the woman feel again like that feeling that you are a little bit on the pedestal, and I think we like to be on a bit of a pedestal, right? And that we're not we're not desperate, we're not abject, you know.
Mm, mm.
We don't like to feel abject. I mean, nobody does, of course, but like I think women are just more sort of psychologically healthy when they don't feel desperate and they
Well,
don't
when they
feel.
feel protected, because
Mm.
this is something Trollope said, that it is better to be um, um, abused than neglected, and
Right.
better to
It's
be
not going to be neglected.
neglected than abandoned. I mean, these are the gradations of undesirable relationships, but um, you know, if he's paying you attention, and even if it's not, the kind of attention you would want, at least he's showing that he cares. But if he's
Hmm.
not at all interested, then he's even more.
Yeah, I yes, yeah. It can I suppose it the abuse of course there are levels of abuse. We don't have much of a tolerance for abuse these days, do we? I remember Sean Connery used to say stuff that like you need to go to hit women every so often. They're keep them in line, this kind of thing, which seemed kind of amusing coming from him. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what's your view? Do you think?
Well, I can see why they would say that, and of course, as a woman, I could, I wouldn't like to be hit. So, this makes me think of the Islamic rules of hitting women, because there is a wife beating verse, as we all know, but it's a kind of sort of ramped up approach, because it starts with she's doing something that you disapprove of as a man, so you start by admonishing her. If it doesn't work, you sleep apart from her, and you
Finally, you
yes,
beat her, but you don't beat her like I think the
you
thing
don't
with
just lash
beating,
out at her. No, no,
yeah,
of course
yeah,
not.
you don't lose it and just beat her black and blue. I think that's always a mistake to
Exactly,
to
and
learn. Yeah.
yes. So it'd be a kind of a verbal warning, a written warning, and a final warning kind of thing. And it could be also interpreted as, well, actually, he has to go through these stages before he can finally divorce her, and which means that she in a way has a kind of feminine privilege, because she's got all these chances to improve herself before he finally divorces her. So and he wouldn't even actually need to hit her very hard, because I've interpreted it in a sort of way that if you really feel you have to hit her, there's no need to actually hit her. You can invite the people who were at the wedding to come, and then you tell her off, and then you smack her on the wrist, and it's very humiliating for her, and then you leave it, and see if she improves. If she doesn't improve, you can proceed straight to the divorce courts, and that would be your way of dealing with your recalcitrant wife.
I'm glad you mentioned the people who are at the wedding, because I once reviewed a book, a very good book called The Case for Marriage, by Linda Gallagher and Gallagher and White. I remember the surnames. Very good book. And one of the things that they discuss is the importance of marriage as a kind of public event where you invite the family and friends, because it is their business, because marriage is a it is the business of people, whereas now a lot of people have this idea that marriage is just between two people. It's this private thing. It's all about your feelings. When your feelings run out, your marriage is over, and nobody should be able to tell you that you can't divorce, right? No one should be able to weigh in. And I really think that that's we really lost something,
Yeah,
because
because it's a human tradition that presumably your married parents want you to carry on this human tradition to the next generation. So they're invested in the idea. So that's why you get all these rules about, who pays for the wedding and whatever.
yeah, you want everyone, like, you want these witnesses to invest, and they explained that, basically they were working with a lot of information that has come out in the last 30 or 40 years um, since the breakup of, like, since the divorce rate started to really climb. And they're saying, like, look, now we have information, data, right? We have information to tell us if this has been good or not, right? And they're saying that it hasn't been. And one of the metrics is the state of children as a result. And because marriage properly is for
Legitimate children.
yes, for legitimate, for bringing up children, for legitimizing children, and for raising children for the next, and for the good of the society. So clearly the product of marriage, children, is the business of the society, right?
And the government,
And the
actually.
government. Yeah, yeah. It is their business, because you're responsible for bringing these people into society, and if they then go out and start committing crimes, then you failed. So one thing that they did notice is that children who are raised by married parents the family invests more in them in every way. Like, they invest time in them, money in them. They put more confidence in them because they're the product of a marriage. And children who are not raised, unfortunately for those children, on average, they do more poorly by every metric, partly because they haven't had this investment from the other people, the other generations, right?
Yes, and if both your parents are married to each other, then it means that both sides of your family will be cooperating with each other. You'll be seeing, your maternal, paternal, side of the family, and playing with your cousins, and getting more socialized than if you were, the only child of your unmarried mother.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I observed this in my own life, because I only got to really get to know my father's side of the family when I was older, and that's because I went looking for them. I tried to find them, and then I met all these cousins when in my 20s who I should have played with as a kid. And I'm not sort of just, I don't want to, it's not us just all about me and my sob story. But I just think I'm a member of a generation that is kind of we're the canary in the coal mine, I guess, because the trends have only gotten worse since I was a kid. So when I was a kid, it was not normal to be the product of a divorced couple, particularly. Then I noticed that it started to increase, and then now it's almost,
Normalized.
very normal. Yeah. And my own friends,
But maybe that's why we're getting crazier and stupider as a society. With the mental health issues, and just obviously, I think the fact that mum is, if she's working, then she won't be around when you come home from school, and then you get into all kinds of trouble, taking drugs, having underage sex, not studying as well, not doing, passing your exams, and having a worse kind of life.
Yes, I mean, it's I mean, I think really we our traditional concept of liberty is in conflict with liberalism, right? Because I think, if we think of the traditional religious idea of liberty as liberty is when you overcome your vices, not the and the modern liberalism is you indulge your vices, or you indulge your desires In theory, the limit is you indulge your desires until they start conflicting with somebody else's indulgence of their desires, which by definition is already a disaster, right?
Yes, yes. And I would define liberty is what we ought to have after all the necessary laws are in place. Because otherwise, I would have a liberty to kill you and steal your stuff and, whatever, which, you wouldn't like. And, well,
Yeah, so we do have, there is that liberty in the sense of those, there is a certain amount, like a range of possibilities, things that we can do. But there's also the classical idea that true liberty is when we conquer our vice, our bad side, So we can't choose what's right if we're addicts, for example. We're not free to choose what is good if we're the slaves of our vices.
Yes.
A man only has as many masters as he has vices, right? That's the
But there is this presumption of free will that both atheists and theists have, don't they?
Yeah.
We like to think that we are dignified with free will.
Well, I think free in the Christian classical formulation, free, we are imbued with the ability to choose between right and wrong. But if we can't, if we're at the mercy of our appetites, then we don't, and our free will
would just be animals. We would be cattle.
Yeah, exactly. We lose our ability to choose the good, and we don't really have any freedom. So this is, comes really obviously in conflict with liberalism's, basic ideas of what freedom is for. And that's why I realized more and more as I became more of a reactionary that in the American formulation, political formulation, really you're just choosing between two types of liberalism, right? The left actually is almost abandoned some aspects of liberalism, but the official right in the United States, at least until very recently, the official right is all about like liberty, supposedly, right?
Oh, you mean the libertarian right and
yeah
the big state liberals?
The liberals, yeah, the people who are called liberals in the U.S. Are actually mostly just kind of socialists, I suppose. Yeah.
But did you find that there's a kind of female preference for socialism?
Well, it's an interesting question, right? Because that goes back to, it's possible that since women have started voting, that we are inevitably more socialist because women might choose safety over freedom, I guess.
Yes. Well, Ann Coulter offered to give up her right to vote, didn't she? Which is pretty noble of her.
Yeah, I think if it meant that we could have a more well-ordered state, I also would give up my right, I think. What about you? Would you give up your vote if it meant we had a more ordered state?
Well, it doesn't seem to make any difference anyway, my vote. I would make it that only taxpayers, people who actually pay tax should vote, but then I would repeal all the anti-discrimination affirmative action legislation, and this would make it less likely. Women would most women do prefer to be at home anyway if you gave them a chance. I think a lot of women, don't want to say that they want to be a housewife, just a mother, and because that her feminist friends would just laugh at her.
But this is a very sad situation, isn't it? Because I don't think it would take much to, hopefully, if the culture changed and we told women that motherhood was the most important thing, and that maybe they could have other interests as well, but they should really place motherhood as the most important thing, and they would get the most respect for that, and people would because that's what women want, status and respect, right?
Yeah,
And
because women even now still want to be mothers, and they still want to be married mothers, but
yeah,
they're finding it harder to find, a marriageable man who
and
they want to marry.
yeah, and also we've got it backwards because women could have children. It would be better if women had children younger, and then maybe when their kids were a bit older, they could pursue some sort of career if they wanted.
Yes,
But what
and women
happened?
would get the best kind of husband in their 20s
Yeah,
rather than the 30s. So,
yeah.
why not just admit this biological fact? Then, you know,
And then instead of this, we get, you know, you get this. You're told, oh, you can do, put
everything.
that off till later. You can do anything, right?
You can freeze your eggs. It's
Oh,
like,
it's just so
no,
horrible.
yuck.
Freeze
But
your. I
nobody
mean,
will want to impregnate them.
it's true. I mean, yeah, this is you can. It's just the most. It's such a horrible condition we're in when women think that freezing their eggs is a better option than just having kids in their 20s. When they're not only when they're their healthiest, but also when they're most, as you say, most likely to get the kind of husband that they want. I mean, the world is their oyster when they're in their 20s, right?
Yes, but it's
It,
only a very small window of time when you
yeah.
think officially it begins when they're 16, which is the age of consent when women can get
Hmm.
married, and
Yeah.
then it closes at 30, and then you're in a hurry. If you're not
Yeah.
married by the time you're 30, you're in a hurry.
Yeah, and things do change. I mean, men are less interested. That's a fact, and it's a bitter pill to swallow, especially if you've been told that hey, you're gonna be you can do whatever until you're 45 or something.
Mm.
It's a rare woman who is able to command the same kind of um, to find the same sort of men, at that older age. Why not just do it the easy, natural way and just follow, the most obvious natural course of things?
Mm.
But
So women do need to be re-educated, wouldn't
yeah,
you say,
I
Justine?
do think so. Yes, yeah. I think we just need to.
Write a book about it.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes wonder, what do you think? Like, I think, there are some women out there giving some good advice, but I think there's definitely room for more. It's such an important issue.
Well,
Um,
yes, yes. I mean, who are doing? I mean, I know a few books called the Surrendered Wife.
I read that actually.
Ah,
Yeah,
well, what
I
did
got
you
a few
think?
tips from it.
Ah,
Have you
yes.
read it?
I've only heard of it, but I haven't read it myself.
So it's basically this woman who used to be a real nag, and then she learned that if she wasn't a nag, that her husband would kind of flower into a much better
Yes,
man, and if she didn't poke at him all the time.
yes,
and and it's kind of it's both, like, it goes back to sort of earlier ideas where if you look at kind of the discourse about marriage and women, like if you read Chaucer, for example, right, you'll have discussions of what the battle of the sexes is a concept, adultery and henpecked husbands and all these things come up in an earlier time.
but it's
But
the same thing, isn't it? It's eternal. The henpecked husband. It's.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
it's definitely it's an archetype for a reason. But it seems to me like the discussion about the sexes was a lot more friendly. Like it was kind of a comical thing, the sexes, battling, but there was no question that the sexes were complementary, and that it was a comedy that would, meaning that in the end it works out for the best, right? Whereas now it's just a tragedy, right?
Well,
Like,
I'm so glad you mentioned it being, complementary, that the roles of the sexes were meant to be complementary because we're more likely to get on with each other if, you do something I absolutely cannot do and I do
yeah,
something that you can't do, and then we would have a reason to stay together. But if we're always competing, it's like whatever you can do, I can do better, and then that would, lead for more. conflicts.
Yeah, and if they try to enforce this like 50-50, so you do half the housework, I do half the yard work, but that's just not. It's better to specialize. I mean, there's a reason why specialization is more efficient, and also they say that the sex lives of couples who follow these traditional roles is better, and this leads to more kids, so that's good.
Mm.
You know,
Well,
I mean,
yes, and if you don't work, then you're just more likely to have more children and want to have them.
yeah. I think it really is like I definitely went through a phase at uh, reading these sort of books like The Rules and The Surrendered Wife, and this is back before I got married myself, and I was feeling like I hadn't had any good advice, except for the odd bit that, like the one I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
the little from my grandma here and there. But just that the sort of the general idea was like the permissive, literally when I was a teenager, it was like, well, lose your virginity as fast as possible and try to harden yourself,
Mm-hmm.
sleep around, and just like the worst advice ever.
Yes, the other way.
Yeah, just and just so destructive. Like I knew girls who I had one a friend who actually had 7 abortions while she was a teenager. No, it's you know
It must destroy you.
yeah,
You know.
I think it does. And
Yeah.
you're not supposed, it's not supposed to destroy you though, because you're supposed to think that it's really nothing, and it's just like you know
Yeah.
you might be allowed to be upset if you had a miscarriage, but because there's this political, especially like especially in the United States, it's also in Canada. I think less so in England. I think it's a little bit less politically loaded in England. I think people are more allowed to say, oh, well, actually, having an abortion is not sort of delightful experience, right?
Mm.
But in the States, it is bizarrely like almost a sacrament for these leftists, right? Like they treat it as though it is a wonderful thing that
A
everyone
rite
should
of
do.
passage, by the
Yeah,
sound of things.
kill your baby, and it's true. I mean, I've heard. I heard someone talking today about how when people sin in this way, and they actually know at some level that it's wrong, and because it's so bad, really, if you confront it, it is really so bad that you want to dig your heels in because you don't want to admit that you've done something really bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
You glorify it
yeah, so
as a
you might
kind of
even
act
dig
of
your heels in more,
defiance.
right?
Mm.
And you do see this with some of these extreme feminists now that who get like, I mean, you see, there are some, I suppose, on social media, they're always your extreme examples, but you do see women who actively glorify it. And I think it's once they dug themselves in, instead of repenting their ways, and
They want to
and
encourage others to join them, which
yeah,
is
because
which
to
is what's
admit,
so evil about it.
yeah, and then spreading it, yeah. So
Mm.
to admit, this is, for anybody out who's listening who's had, this experience, you're obviously not alone in these days, and but you can repent and you can get better
Yeah.
from this experience. You grow up in a world with very distorted values, and
There is a way
it's
back.
a tragedy.
There is a way back. I mean your story made me think of um, I forget where it was in the UK, but it was they found there was an archaeological find of a Roman brothel, or a brothel that existed in Roman times in Britain, and they said, oh, we know because there are lots of, skeletons of
Oh,
infants, buried there, and that's why we think it was, a Roman brothel.
that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, the
Mm.
Romans definitely practiced infanticide and exposure to a large degree.
Yes, but I suppose for prostitutes, they would get themselves knocked up and then they'd carry
Yeah.
on working until they were too, and then they'd have a bit of a rest, and then when they recovered, they'd start again. I imagine that would be how it worked.
Yeah, yeah. I think about that too. Like, how does this work? Because you're a prostitute in, medieval times or in Roman times, and you're going to get pregnant. So, um,
So you get your rest months, I suppose,
yeah, I suppose
when you're
'cause
too big to work, and
you like a few months, and then you'd have this baby.
which
But
you would kill.
yeah, or yeah, you could very well, yeah, you could kill. I mean, it's just such an inversion of how we, of a happy life, I guess.
Mind you, this whole idea of, I mean, I'm sure that there were, lots of parents, married parents, who would, occasionally get rid of their kid too,
Oh yes,
because there were too
yeah,
many of them.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you see that now that people have this. Arguably, it's once you start approaching it with a kind of with a birth control sort of mindset, like it's not just that that pregnancy is a kind of almost pretty predictable outcome of having sex, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
but but it's something that you should plan, choose, all this sort of thing, right? All this language and using and even like just using birth control itself kind of uh, it makes you think of it as something that is divorced from the actual sex act itself, which is really, you know, yes, people, sex is that's how you make babies and you make real human people with that act, and it's not a toy, right? But the thing is that you can forgive people for having this idea because we really live in a society uh, that is addicted to this idea of sex as a recreation, or
Recreational
yeah,
activity.
yeah,
And I suppose the old fashioned idea was that only married people had the right to have recreational sex with each other, and no one else did, and that kind of made
yeah. It's like
sense.
you
Yes.
kind of channel your sexual. I think rightly you should ideally you channel your sexual drives into marriage, um, and or you don't have sex, and if you do, then repent for it. It's just not. It sounds like it's so against the modern spirit that people just balk against this and kick against this, right? I know because it took me a while to reach this position. Like
Mm.
I was not raised a Christian. I was not religious. Brought up in a religious household at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I I became a Catholic, and then in a funny way, all the like when I became a Catholic, not everything had sunk in,
When did
really.
you become Catholic?
Well, I got actually became Anglican when I was 27,
Mm-hmm.
and then I converted to Catholicism when I was 32. We use the language of full communion. So the church considers that Anglicans are in partial communion with the Roman Catholic Church. So it's like you don't get rebaptized or something. You just get confirmed as a Catholic. You get you attend classes for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that the culture is so contrary to these ideas about sexuality that it really took, I think your conversion just keeps going because the conclusions, the basic ideas, like I would say when I became a Roman Catholic, I just kind of said, they're probably right about this stuff, but I can't quite accept some of the teachings about sexuality now, or they don't quite, I don't quite see how, why, or something, this, that, and the other. But then once you kind of take that step, then it all starts to fall into place. And I think you probably found the same thing with Islam. The things that seemed crazy start kind of making sense to you, and it, things that your mind probably pushed against at some stage. I mean, I don't know if you're if
Well,
are you a convert?
I'm not. Well, I'm actually agnostic. I'm not actually Muslim,
Right. You're
but
just interested in
in the
Quran,
political
for instance,
aspects of
as a
gender
way of life,
relations.
I guess.
Yeah, and also, well, how do you get people to do certain things, and being legally trained? Islam just says, well, of course you would, if you agree with this or that, if you believe in this God who made these revelations, and his commandments and whatever, then obviously you'd want to incorporate it into your laws. Why wouldn't
If
you?
these things follow, yeah. So that's
And
where,
it's a
yeah,
truism anyway that your laws would reflect whatever moral system that you chose. Whether you're communist or fascist or Nazi, you would expect if the moral system was operating to have these laws reflected in the laws of the land.
yes, and that's what we've lost in liberalism, right? And is in that,
We don't
you
even
know,
know what liberalism is because there's no book of liberalism. There's no book of rules.
we don't know what it is because we're swimming in it for one thing, right?
Well, I
But
think that the problem with liberalism is that people are just so confused about it. Because if
yeah,
you go to Australia, the Liberal Party is actually the Conservative Party
oh yeah, yeah,
down
yeah.
under.
But it's kind of like I was saying earlier about the U.S. Everybody's actually a liberal, really. Like the Republican Party are liberals in the sense of, the big picture in terms of like they think that they can have a political order that is neutral on religion. So you know it's superficially appealing because it's like, oh well, we'll tolerate all these different religions, and the state will be agnostic as to the truth of any of these religions. The appeal is that the idea is that it's supposed to cut down on conflict between the religious
Actually,
groups
it
and allow,
increases conflict
yeah,
because then everybody will have their own little idea about how to live, and then they'll be competing with each other. Where
yeah,
yeah, and I think there was always this idea of using religion as a source of morality. Washington, well, he was the one who said we must indulge. We must, with caution, indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion.
yes, we must indulge the supposition that
With
morality can
caution,
be
indulge the
caution,
supposition.
yeah. It's interesting. They did think about these. Like, in some ways, the founding fathers of the United States, they took certain things for granted, but they did, like, where we are now is that, a lot of us in the West, what we've discovered is that actually you can't just have a state that claims to be new. For one thing, there is no moral neutrality. That's not real. So
Because
the
there will
state,
be laws unless you don't have any laws, but then even if you don't have any laws, you will still have the law of the jungle. So
yeah,
we can't escape it,
yeah,
even
you
if you.
have that, and then you have a sort of fake neutrality, really, and but I remember hearing people saying things like, again, like growing up in this kind of leftist kind of milieu, where you'd hear apropos sexual morality, oh, the state shouldn't come in your bedroom. Famously, I'm Canadian, so Pierre Trudeau, who was the prime minister in the 70s, he's the father of the current nightmare. Um,
How so?
although mind you, I mean, in the sense that he's the father of Justin Trudeau.
Oh, right, okay.
Um, but he's also the father of certain other nightmares in Canada. In
Yes,
ideological
social
sense.
policies. I'm not sure what you meant.
Yeah, he said, I think he said, we can't be in the nation, we can't legislate in the nation's bedrooms, or words to that effect, right? But and they talk as though law is somehow this well, there are these laws, like let's say laws against murder and theft and so on. These are somehow these morally neutral things, and then we have this religious stuff over here, right? And as soon as you call it religious, we've got this sort of idea that it's cordoned off in this area of like private morality that has nothing, that no one has access to, or it doesn't count really if it's religious. And then these other laws over here that are just these morally neutral, in the sense that they're not informed by religion, right? They're just like, oh, self-evidently reasonable laws, right?
Well, I think people take that attitude towards sex between consenting adults because
Yeah.
they can't see the harm of it at the time. It's like, well, a man has sex with a man. Well, what happens? Nothing happens at the time. A woman has sex with a woman, but if you normalize it, and then you'll find that your
It
birth
has a
rate
lot
has
of
declined,
yeah.
or
Yeah.
if you allow no fault divorce, then the divorce rate will go
And
up,
family
and
starts falling apart. Yeah.
yeah, and there'll be more mental health issues and underachievement, and then the demand for cheap immigrant labor because the
Yeah.
working classes have been destroyed, or they haven't been parented or educated or trained properly, and
Yeah,
they
it's such a betrayal of ordinary people. There's one interesting person I was listening to here in Britain, who I thought was quite talking in the Labour Party, amazingly, who is talking a bit of sense. Have you heard of this guy? He's called Morris.
Glassman.
Yes, Morris Glassman. Have you heard of
Oh
him?
yes. He
Yeah.
was in Blue Labour. He got kicked out for saying immigration must be stopped immediately,
Actually
and
got kicked out of the party.
yeah, he still got big because Ed Miliband. He's Jewish, and Ed Miliband didn't protect him
Yeah.
at all because he incurred the wrath of the feminazis because he was making anti-feminist comments.
I didn't realize that. I'm not surprised to learn that he got kicked out. I mean, it's funny because I heard an interview with him on Spiked, of all places, but because they're not exactly social conservatives, but they're sort of more like libertarian types. But he was talking. I mean, I would vote for him. He made such sense. He was talking about how, in fact, I mean, to sort of raise one of the topics that we mentioned and for the stream, distributism. He actually is inspired by distributism and quotes a lot from G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc, who were the original distributists.
Mm-hmm.
And I also loved the fact that he talked about limiting immigration. He talked about the importance of the family. He also talked about labor being part of a harmonious whole, as opposed to in a combative relationship with management. Talked about the medieval guild system. He was he not it wasn't you just said his name, the guy
Morris
who didn't
Glassman.
stand up for him. Yeah, Morris Glassman's what he was the advisor to that candidate, right? Who you mentioned also. His name is just he advised the Labour candidate who you said didn't stick up for him.
Ed Miliband. Well, he was actually the leader of the Labour Party.
Yeah, he was the leader at the time, and he ran, and then he lost, right? Well, I think Morris Glassman was his advisor for that campaign.
Oh, right, right. I didn't know the detail of that, but I know that Ed and David Miliband, brothers,
Hmm.
wanted the top job, and Ed Miliband won because of the peculiarities of the voting system.
Yeah. Um, so, yeah, I was quite sort of pleasantly surprised to hear him. I didn't realize that anyone in the Labor Party
Yeah.
was talking sense. So,
Yes, I mean these Jews do say quite right wing things. I mean, there was one. You may not have heard of Keith Joseph.
I don't know Keith Joseph. No,
Oh,
is
oh,
he?
great. Well, in the 70s, um, he actually said in his 1974 Edgbaston speech that um, because there was this sort of increase in unmarried mothers, and he talked, in eugenic
Uh-huh.
terms, saying our human stock is threatened or is being
Right.
destroyed,
Okay.
or something like that. And there was such a huge outcry, and then, I think he was frightened enough into apologising, but it was too late, and then Maggie took over, which kind of, reinforced the idea that, the matriarchal takeover began
Right.
from then.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Thatcher's not. I'm less and less kind of charmed by Thatcher's policies these days. I guess when I first became a right winger, I thought, because there's this sort of binary that you have, like there's the left and the right, and I thought like, well, I guess all these hippies I grew up with, they're wrong. So these people over here, maybe they were right the whole time. And now I realized that I'm pretty sure that I'm sure, even though Thatcher had a couple of things going for her, that her policies were not helpful. you know.
Yes, but apparently it has been said that Britain is the birthplace of neoliberalism, because it
Indeed.
was here that began this idea of selling off your public utilities, and then
Yes.
everybody followed. So,
And sending your late and it's a problem because again, like with the unions, they were had the unions had developed in a very unhealthy direction, I think. And that another thing I liked about Morris Glassman is that he was talking about a new vision for the unions, I guess, that would again would promote this idea of harmony as opposed to conflict. And we're always in a situation of conflict now, everybody. And also I
we'd
think it's
have to
part
have
of
a one
the
party state to reduce a conflict, and that again will just sort of send everybody off into a tailspin. But another thing I'd like to point out is that George Washington didn't believe in political parties. So this idea of a one party state is not some, Hitlerian,
yeah.
an idea from Hitler, Mao, or
No.
Mussolini. It's actually, perfectly American then, from Washington.
Yes, yeah, they were not Democrats, and for most of them were, they wanted a republic with a, like you were saying, a limited number of people voting, and only those who really had skin in the game rather.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we see, well, let me go back to distributism. Shall we talk about that a little bit?
Oh, yes, please
The,
do.
so distributism is like a third position uh, economic theory that I would say has a lot of other dimensions to it. It was developed by G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc, and they were most active in the 1920s and 30s. And Chesterton was always, he was dealing with the kind of progressives really very similar in some respects to the progressives that we see now. And he wrote a great deal. He was very active. He had a column. He had wrote tons and tons of books, and his theories were a response to a papal encyclical by Leo the 13th in 1913, I believe it was, called Rerum Novarum, New Things. And it was specifically about the problems of labor in capitalism. And so they were trying to respond to some of the ideas the Pope had raised, because he said he didn't agree with capitalism. He also didn't agree with socialism, and he explained why, and why this is not good for the working class in particular. So the idea in distributism is that private property is actually a good thing, but it should be it's such a good thing that everybody should have some of it. And of course, they tended to use the medieval system as a positive model, as opposed, in modernity we usually get a every people refer to medieval times as though this is everything bad, right? But you wouldn't want to go back to being a serf. You wouldn't want to go back to medieval times when things were so harsh and everybody died and stuff. Like, okay, maybe medicine wasn't so advanced, but in terms of like violence and so on, I mean, we just lived through the most bloodthirsty, violent century, the 20th century of all time, when in one afternoon during Stalin's regime, more people died than during the entire Inquisition.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely, in modernity, it's not like we're living in a time of loveliness, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the medieval period definitely has its problems, but it also had a lot of virtues. And so
maybe it's a white people thing, this war thing.
The World War? So white people?
Well, I think two world wars in the previous centuries, and then the Napoleonic wars, and I mean there's always been wars in Europe because it's a kind of very fighty country for some reason.
It's, I mean,
and then going to America and having a civil war there, and it's like,
I mean, once we got our hands on technology and that in combination with certain ideologies, it seemed like we just couldn't stop killing ourselves. It's amazing are any of us still around after all after all this. So the ideal of distributism is, well, one thing is that instead of the individual being the basic unit, the family is the basic economic unit. Mm-hmm. And the principles of distributism are to attempt, and it's not clear on the mechanisms necessarily, although distributism is getting a lot more attention these days, to attempt to distribute property as widely as possible so that workers own the means of production, and to revive a kind of system of guilds. It's something like along the guild system as well. So it applies to, there are a lot of different domains of life. But I think the most important idea is that whereas in communism we have this idea that private property is something bad and we should go to a state where everybody shares everything, and in capitalism you have an idea that it's private property is good, but it's not a problem that so much is concentrated in a very small amount of people, and that you have such a large proletariat, right, who are living in a kind of servile state because they don't own the means of production. Their labor is all they can sell, right?
So the idea of distributism is to reduce income inequality and thereby conflict within society.
Yeah, improve. I mean, it is one of the goals, but I think property is to increase independence through private property, and to sort of ensure that everybody owns their
has a stake in society.
Sorry?
Has a stake in society.
Yes, that's right. A stake in society. That's a good way to put it. So the more sort of home ownership, the better. The more small business, the better. The more ownership of your own tools, the better. Mm-hmm. And also that families family formation should be encouraged. That's another important tenet, and that so it's like it's working against the kind of atomization whereby we see the individual as the
Yes.
As the basic unit. And this tends to, what we can see is that family formation, whatever we're doing now is not working because family formation is
What
going
about
down.
the banning of usury? Wouldn't that, in one stroke achieve what you've just...
They definitely were against usury, and in fact, Chesterton has a book called The Utopia of Usurers, which is sort of it's named after an essay where he attacks aspects of usury. One of the things that Chesterton explains is how the ownership of land in Britain became so unequal, and that is part of it is that one is the dissolution of the monasteries, right? So that land that was church land and had a more communal kind of use went into the hands of the supporters of Henry VIII as a kind of reward for supporting his, divorce. Yeah. So what is weird though is that he thought that this move would make the monarchy much more powerful, but it actually seemed to backfire because one generation after the dissolution of the monasteries and the break with Rome, the same people, only sort of the descendants of these same people who acquired land and thereby got political power, and then turned around and attacked the monarchy. So Chesterton said, having looted the church, they then looted the monarchy, right? And so then you had the English Civil War and the execution of Charles I, right? And it's really this is how we have like the kind of mercantile class become sovereign in this country. Eventually, Parliament became sovereign, and even though, we still officially have a monarchy, but realistically, our monarchy is a kind of show. Someone said, we are like a disguised republic, effectively, right? Like our monarchy is there as a decoration. They're not actually sovereign. The Queen is not sovereign. She has more power than she ever uses. She could,
and she can only do it once before, if she wanted to make a political point, she probably could do it, but then that would be the end of the monarchy.
Well, people have swallowed this idea that the monarchy should be neutral, which is very odd because, the monarchy used to be the sovereigns, right?
Well, yes, but so the whole thing doesn't make sense, and that means it's obviously an anachronism. And I was thinking, they don't have many human rights. If they can't discuss politics, if they can't marry who they like, if they can't convert to any religion that isn't Anglicanism, it's not much of a life, is it?
Well, no, it's not. I wouldn't. Yeah, I don't think their position is enviable. I'm a bit of a Jacobite myself. That's not a Jacobin. A Jacobite is.
What's the difference?
So a Jacobite is supporter of the Stuarts in the 17th century. So have you heard of the Glorious Revolution?
Yes,
so-called?
William and Mary.
Yeah,
securing the Protestant succession.
Exactly. Yeah. So they dethroned there was this very tiny group from Parliament, about 7 people, who decided to invite William of Orange and Mary, who was the Protestant daughter of the King, James II. Effectively, James had converted to Catholicism, which obviously made him a lot of enemies. But the real problems came when he had a son with his new Catholic wife, and that then looked like there would be a Catholic succession. And one of the reasons they were so prejudiced against Catholics is that the Whigs, who sort of followed on from the Puritans, they were so always very nervous that they were going to lose the land that they had acquired in the dissolution of the monasteries, right? they also had this superstition, this sort of this idea that like that Catholicism, this idea of a single religious polity equals this equals slavery, or this equals tyranny, right? And
But I suppose the Pope was sort of been around for so long that they could only think of being subservient to the Pope, which is maybe the kind of mindset we now have as the EU being the kind of like the
yeah,
Pope.
I reject this analogy. I reject this analogy.
Why?
Um,
Oh,
well,
because
okay,
you're Catholic. But it's this sort of idea of a dominant European ideology. I suppose that was and of
okay.
course
I
in
mean, I get it. Like David Starkey has made this argument um, that the break with Rome was like the first Brexit and all that. It doesn't really stand. Doesn't
But
really
wasn't
stand.
it inevitable that European monarchs would sooner or later get tired of being told by the Pope what to do?
See,
Um,
I think it's the thing is like if well, I think that the it's right for the religious, the spiritual realm, the spiritual, uh, the spirit, the kind of spiritual authority to be. It's in a sense it was separate, right, but interpenetrating because bishops crown kings, and because kings, what is the authority that kings have to defer to? The authority is the religious, is God, right? So they have to, the everybody has to follow the sovereign is responsible to God. So but what the Protestant sort of revolution really was, were a few factors, right? But I would say the biggest factor was a power grab, as I think you're suggesting. That a lot of the princes of Europe saw that they could get accrue more power to themselves. But then it had, and so that was one of the factors. There were some obviously, very sincere Protestants who had, criticisms to make of the church, and there and then we had the Counter Reformation and sort of taking on board some of those criticisms. But you did have some intense religious thinkers. But in Britain, contrary to popular belief, in England, this was not widespread at all in Henry VIII's time. It was a few members of the elite were interested in reform, but they didn't think of it as breaking with the church. They just thought of it as improving, certain areas of corruption, right? So
yes,
like,
I mean,
okay,
there was all these sort of, probably a few little things that, people of the time thought, they didn't like Catholic interference. But surely when Henry VIII broke from Rome, it was about whom he could or couldn't marry.
yeah, that's what it came down to. And it was kind of in a way, it was unfortunate that the Pope at the time he was a prisoner in the Castello d'Angelo in Rome. He was a prisoner of the emperor at the time. He wasn't really in a very free, and the emperor was the nephew of Catherine of Aragon, right?
And
So
he didn't want her humiliated.
he didn't want to humiliate her. I mean, it's a little much, right? I mean, if you think about, this poor woman was married to him for about 20 years. She did give, she gave him a daughter. I mean, they thought, because
If Henry had been Muslim, there'd be no problem because
right,
he could
yes,
have
he
had.
could have multiple. Well, he did consider, because he had an illegitimate son. There was a possibility that he could have legitimized this son, and this did happen sometimes. So there was
But he'd
this.
have to marry the mother. That was the only
Actually,
way.
no, they sometimes legitimized kids who, and made them legitimate, and that occasionally happened. Like for example, William the Conqueror was William the Bastard. He was illegitimate, and one way that he sort of showed his mettle was by invading England. So not all of the kings are legitimate.
Yes, but I mean, isn't it technically the case that if your parents were never married to each other, then
you're
you know
illegitimate. But
you're illegitimate?
there was a process which was legitimization, and it did occasionally happen for in the case of
Without your parents having to marry, it just
yeah.
took your father to recognize you, or something,
Yes, yeah.
something
So he
like
could
that.
have recognized. In fact, he considered. I think he was just honestly. I think he got into it. He was smitten. I mean, he definitely was led around by his parts, right? And he was smitten by Anne Boleyn. And Anne Boleyn, her sister had been the mistress of Henry VIII, and she she basically said, "Look, I'm not going to become your mistress." And then eventually she realized that she could demand that he try to get an annulment from his wife, and
Would
that's
that have made Mary illegitimate? Did he did get
would
his
it have made
annulment, didn't he?
his daughter illegitimate?
Yes, because if your marriage has been annulled, it just means that you're taken to back to the point before you married your spouse.
It was within his gift basically to make them legitimate or illegitimate, and he did that. Actually, he made at one stage he made Mary and Elizabeth illegitimate, and then he made them legitimate again. So he
Ah,
was, you know and especially after he appointed himself head of the church, he just could do whatever he liked. But it really, when you concentrate that much power in like that, it kind of it has a weird effect of making the institution more fragile. It seems like it's going to make it more strong, but once you kind of your authority, I think, comes into question when you just start doing things purely for your own benefit. So
yes.
you really didn't have popular support for the Protestantism at that time. In fact, there was more than one rebellion, very serious rebellion. There was one called the Pilgrimage of Grace in the north of England, which involved thousands of people rising up against the dissolution and also the break with Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended up they ended up getting horribly killed.
Mm-hmm.
He actually made a deal with them that if they gave up their arms, and that he would forgive them, and then they just massacred them. He
Even
really
after they
wasn't kind of-
surrendered,
Yeah, they surrendered, and
and
then they
then
got
he
massacred.
massacred them.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and that happened in the south of England as well. So it was very the ordinary people were quite conservative and attached to their traditions. But
Yes, I know that with Henry, was very adamant that none of the wording of the prayers or the rituals were changed because he knew it would upset
yeah,
them. So,
yeah,
so that's why you can see in the Book of Common Prayer, it still blesses the Catholic Church to this day.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'd say to Anglicans, "Oh, what's this, blessing Catholic Church thing?" And he said, "Oh, it just means universal." But I'm sure it means, because Henry didn't dare change the words
I think
in case it
yeah, that's
triggered
part of
people.
it. And he always, I mean, there was always with Anglicanism, I think there was always the chance, because you still had the apostolic succession, you still had bishops and archbishops, that there was still the chance that they could rejoin the Roman Church. And of course you have large factions of the church, that so-called Anglo-Catholics, that are technically Anglican, but they consider themselves to be in communion with Rome. That's like their idea,
You're
and they
not one
want
of
to.
them.
No,
You're
I'm a Roman
Roman
Catholic. Yeah.
Catholic. So, did you consider becoming an Anglo Catholic?
Well, I was um I think, I mean, I certainly I've attended Anglo-Catholic services because I have friends who are Anglo-Catholic, and I actually went to one for in when on January 30th, I like to mark the death of Charles the First, um, and who was executed on that day, and he was executed outside the banqueting house, and there's in Whitehall,
Uh-huh.
and there's this organization, because he's actually the only saint of the Anglican Church,
Charles,
Charles the First is a saint.
the beheaded monarch was
Yeah,
considered a saint.
he's considered a saint by the Anglican Church because he was like martyred to that church because the Civil War was between two factions of Protestantism, right? It was between the Anglicans, like Charles the First was an Anglican, and the Puritans.
Right.
And so the Puritans, like Oliver Cromwell and his gang, they were there. They really wanted to get rid of what they saw as any vestigial Catholicism. So, like the prayers that you're describing that Henry VIII left in, they wanted to get rid of all that. They were much more sort of hardcore, Protestants.
Mm-hmm.
So they weren't happy with not really changing everything. They wanted to really, really change everything. And that's where the name Puritan comes from, is that they saw that as a purification of the church. So because they were the ones who rebelled against Charles the First, for not just for that reason, but they essentially, I think the monarchy was kind of leaking power partly because of what Henry had done earlier with consolidating power in himself, and then his move to the dissolution and selling off all that land to all those people. He then empowered a large group of essentially like bourgeoisie who got ennobled and got all this power, and then they just wanted to be sovereign. They wanted Parliament to be sovereign. They didn't want the king to tell them what to do. Mm-hmm. And the king was in bad financial shape by that time. So in any case, there's a very reverent service given by the Anglo-Catholics for Charles I every year on January 30th. And I attend that.
What?
So yeah, it has its attractions, but no, I want that kind of unity, really, ultimately. I do like the local. I kind of like to see a balance between local culture and the kind of universalism of the Roman Catholic Church, because you can have these services that respect some of the old English kind of folk ways.
What made you decide you wanted to become Roman Catholic, having become Anglican?
I think honestly, I think the Anglican part was a kind of tiptoe into. And if you tell left-wing hippies that you're becoming Christian, they're like, this to them is anathema, right? Like that's how you they're a little more accepting. I think part of it, I was just a bit I wasn't brave enough, to kind of go whole hog. They would have been more upset if I were a certain type of evangelical Protestant. That would have upset them the most, I think. But the Roman Catholic Church, because of our teaching on sexual immorality, that's what they really hate. So, I suppose for one thing, I see
you were not attracted by the beauty of the rituals of the Catholic Church.
I am absolutely attracted by those things. And
so you read Evelyn Waugh and kind of thing. Yeah.
There's it's like, in a way, it's a process of seduction. Like, there's a real draw, a real allure. But I think it's the sacramentality that they're not sort of fudging anything. The Catholic Church doesn't. It's like, this is the true presence of Jesus Christ in the bread and wine, and we're not like just pretending. We're not just going through the motions. Of course, you have people who are more sincere than others, but like they're not embarrassed, right? They're not embarrassed.
Well, I think the Catholic Church puts on the best show, the best sound and light show, don't they? Have you been to Farm Street?
Yeah, that's a good one. The
lighting is so perfect and so beautiful, isn't it? I mean, if you
The Latin Mass is absolutely, yeah. The Latin Mass is the most reverent, and that, I believe, Farm Street is where the Anglican Ordinariate is, meaning the Anglicans who decided to become Roman Catholic when they started making female bishops in the Anglican Church.
Oh.
So the whole church, in certain whole congregations decided to leave the Anglican Church at that stage. Right. So unfortunately, the Anglican Church is they've just really gone a bit too far with some of these liberal ideas, right? And of course, we see a bit of that infection at certain levels in the Roman Catholic Church as well. But at least we don't have female priests, we don't have female bishops.
But it could be coming.
I don't think so. There's been there's a certain type. It's essentially the John Paul II considered the idea, and he rejected it in a way that is lasting. You can't just overturn what he said. So there's
yes, doctrine of papal infallibility.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So there's basically, when the Pope speaks in a certain mode, like, it's not the infallibility isn't. It's not like everything it doesn't mean that everything the Pope says is infallible. It means that when he speaks in a certain
ex cathedra, maybe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That he makes a certain type of pronouncement on matters of faith.
Yes.
That is there, he's considered to be infallible. So that means that because John Paul II made this decision and pronouncement on the question of female priests, the present Pope can't just overturn it. So it's already been decided, and it's basically set in stone. But yeah, the Farm Street one you described, that's, so if people are looking for, they don't want any any liberalism in their Catholicism, the Latin Mass, also known as the Tridentine Mass, is the one to look for. And there's an organization called the Latin Mass Society here in England that is the, they're the ones who organize all these things.
Have you ever met Bishop Williamson?
I have not. Have you met Bishop Williamson?
Yes, some years ago. Yes, a very graceful man. He was holding his Tridentine Mass in a community centre of all places. Because that was what he was left with, and it made me think, amongst the plastic chairs that you could stack up and, everything, and you think, here is a man, deprived of his props, even though, he carried his cassock in, the lace and everything in this sort of graceful, theatrical, elegant way. Somehow it just couldn't be done in that community centre. But there were, right. Quite a few, hardcore Catholics who obviously, had a problem with the other thing. Oh yes, the mantilla. Or a mantilla.
Yes, I actually got my first mantilla.
Yes.
I got my first mantilla.
I've got one too.
Have you?
Yes.
Excellent.
I couldn't resist getting one just as a souvenir of that.
Well, they are lovely. I got a sort of small, so it's a lace veil that you wear over your hair as a sign of reverence.
Yes.
And there are small ones and big ones. I got a kind of small one to start off with. It's just kind of a sign that I'm, that I can get a big one later on.
Yes.
But it's I think it's not the only. I still think that the Novus Ordo masses can be very reverent, but certainly the Latin masses are the the most reverent, and it may be that is ultimately the best way to go. But I do think people who are looking, especially if they're on more kind of right-wing, mindset, they don't want to, you could, you might run into an annoying liberal or something. It's the safest bet is to go to one of these Latin masses, because you're not going to get any kind of annoying hippie priest there. You're not going to, you're gonna get what you wanted. The other thing we're going to talk about, just briefly cover integralism, which
Yes, I'm sorry, you went all out all the places.
there's all sorts of lovely. I mean, it's very enjoyable to talk about these things. So just
What is that your book? Did you write it?
no, it's I wish. The book is by Father Thomas Crean and Father Alan Phimister. They're both, I believe, Thomas Crean is a monk, and I believe Alan Phimister is also a priest, but I'm not sure that he's a monk. They're both English.
Right.
And this is it's a new book, which is making a very strong argument against liberalism and for an explicitly religious political order.
It's Sharia for Catholics, isn't it?
Yes, Sharia for Catholics. Yeah, yeah, and sort of, if he's arguing from Aquinas for the most part, like definitely using Thomas Aquinas. It's an interesting book because at the end of each chapter, there's a list of theses. So, because it's quite, challenging, it's handy at the end of each chapter to have this list of theses, just in case you missed the main points. You can go over this.
A helpful summary at the end.
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. So he kind of starts, he says he's returning to the idea of Christendom, which is something that, has been lost, in the last couple of generations. Even the EU decided to leave Christianity out of their constitution, right? Mm-hmm. So we used to be Christendom, and now we're, some kind of liberal formulation that, again, like this idea that, oh, well, people can practice their religions, but it's, it's a private matter and it shouldn't intrude on the public space effectively, right? But what you really get is their religion. So, their religion, the religion of our current elites, is a kind of aggressive atheism that has very deeply held, they have very deeply held attitudes, which are largely unexamined when you talk to these people. The kind of people who
and can't be questioned.
Yeah, you can't. Like egalitarianism is one thing that's a point of their.
Yeah,
faith.
I mean, it's crazy when I think about it. It's like they're just living out the ideas of the French Revolution. And what did the French revolutionaries do? They just had a wish list of 3. Liberty, equality, and fraternity, and it makes no sense. You can't have a laundry list and say it's your political ideology, or at least it won't last.
We're going to get this.
Yeah.
Yeah. With I mean, it is, once you realize that they usually claim, oh, well, they're against so-called religion, they're against morality and stuff like that, but they have incredibly strongly held moral suppositions. And also, I think because they've abandoned traditional morality, especially sexual morality, it leaks into other areas. For example, food. I think the kind of intensity that a lot of people apply to food, for example, veganism and trends around food, or let's say animal, rights activism, these kinds of things that they tend to get into, certain forms of environmentalism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's distorted because, of course, these things like the welfare of animals and the ecology and what have you, these are, of course, issues, but the problem with them is that their handling of these issues are profoundly anti-human. They have this kind of, especially the environmentalists, they tend to have this real hatred of humanity.
And wanting to self-genocide, it seems.
Yeah.
You know,
to
let's all be gay, let's all be transgender, let's not have any babies. If we have any, kill them. And you know, we're just a virus on the face of Earth, and
yeah,
we should, you know.
we're a virus on the face of the earth, so let's like educate everybody not to eat decent, you know, nutritious food anymore, and they'll all eat. It's like the meme, you know, eat the bug man, right?
Hmm.
Eat your bugs. You see these ideas being sneaked into the media all the time, like, hey, you could eat reformulated insects, and you know,
Mm.
how about that? And it's all coming out of the you know, I guess these globalist organizations. I'm on. I mean, it's interesting, you know, as to the source of the ideas. There's like it's a combination between actual, you know, intentionality and conscious plans and so on,
Mm.
and I guess what, you know, someone like Ralph would call like an emergent phenomenon, which is
Yes. I mean, I think it's something to do with the fact that they don't want to deal with the people they're supposed to govern. You know, it's almost as if, you know, we can't be bothered to deal with you, the people we govern, and we just, you know, rather you all just sort of went away and disappeared off the face of the earth. And that's why we have driverless cars and driverless trains, because we can't be bothered to deal with the proletariat, you
yeah.
know, and we'll just have robots. And you think, well, who's going to build them? And when you build them, if something goes wrong, you're going to be able to fix them easily, or maybe not that easily. And then people will have lost their skills. They won't be able to drive trains or cars, and they won't be able to do anything, and it'll be stupid. And any little, you know, disaster will just you know, send us into a tailspin of extinction. And they haven't thought about that. And of course, the technocrats that would be running everything will probably, you know, extort money from the government or whatever, because that's how things are. So you don't allow them to concentrate too much power in the technocrats or whatever. But it doesn't, you know, it doesn't even make sense, you know, according to their own terms, I don't think.
Yeah, they've completely lost sight of the ends of politics, you know, which, as the, you know, Green argues, well, the ends of politics is salvation, really, but it's to help man to live his to attain the highest good that he can attain in his life, you know. So it's this
To
is
fulfill our potential as individuals, as groups, as nations.
families, yeah,
Mm.
to live like a fruitful life on earth and a happy life on earth, and these concepts are so far away from our current elites. As you say, they seem to be, it's like they want to um, just cancel the concept of humanity, um, and just find different ways to make it die off until they're, what, a few of them are left with these robots or something. Yeah.
Yes, and I mean, even the sort of sex bots that are becoming popular now, you know, it is everything to avoid sexual reproduction. And
Yeah,
uh,
everything, so many things to avoid sexual reproduction, with the underlying sort of assumptions of um, that, you know, well, there are too many of these whole gross human beings, and let's get rid of some. And no wonder some people are, you know, nervous about taking certain medicines that they're supposed to take, right? Because these people openly say, you know, like William Fentz, if you know what I'm talking about, openly says that he wants to see the human population reduced,
hmm.
you know, to whatever I think the number is, like 500,000 or something. You know, it's like they openly talk about this. I don't know. I'm agnostic on the current.
Yeah, yeah, but you know, whether they're doing it or not, I mean, the fact that it is a problem when people, you know, don't believe anything you as a government say. I mean, it means you're
Yeah,
not governing well. They think you're crazy or stupid or evil, or, you know, to do so many things in this way, and then not be prepared to answer questions on, you know.
and then we're seeing, like, I think in the States now, the current regime are turning their they always have to be at war with somebody, right? And now they've basically decided that half of their own population are the target, right? So they're
Surplus to requirements.
yeah, they're surplus to requirements, and they're ideologically dangerous. They're like trying to redefine these parents who are upset about certain ideologies, like critical race theory being deployed in schools. They show up to the education board meetings,
Mm-hmm.
and now they're being told. Now they're saying these people are terrorists. They're domestic terrorists.
Well, yeah, and really, it actually makes sense to have children because what I fear is that if you're if you're if the average age of your nation is high, you're not you will put up with this crap because you think, well, I won't be around for much longer, and hopefully, I'll be long gone when the worst case.
When
So
this,
now,
yeah,
yeah, but if you have a low average age, if you're in your 20s, you just wouldn't put up with this crap. You'd get rid of them, for the outrage against
plus,
reason and
we should be thinking, because if you have families that you're thinking, well, I might be dead, but my kids are going to be here.
yeah,
My
and I actually
grandkids.
care about them.
Yeah, I should care about. So we need. I mean, you know, there's a term in biology, like group selection, I guess, right? And one of the, and, not everybody can. Families definitely need to be encouraged. Not everyone can. That's not possible for everyone, but everybody can be more invested in the rest of the people. Can care more about their community and.
I mean,
And
the
if
family is a kind of group buddy system. I don't know if you remember, going, I mean, on school trips, you be paired up with somebody else. So
Yeah.
so you look after each other. You don't get lost and ruin the day for everyone on the school trip. And so if you have families, we're all supposed to look after each other and in that way remain independent without becoming a charge of the state. And
That's right.
that
Yeah.
was the most efficient way of running things. And that was how
Yeah.
it's been done.
Some of them are like these, kind of this mentality that we're describing. I was actually having a discussion with somebody once, and I said something like, well, having I was extolling the civil society, right, as like family and having a strong civil society. And he just, why is it good to have a strong civil society? He really thought that it should just be the individual and the state, and that's it, that it should just be it's just such a foreign kind of concept to me now.
Yes.
This
The late Rabbi Sachs compared, these different ways of thinking about living, and he was saying, people just traditionally like living in homes with their families, but now the current system is we all live in a hotel room, and we're not happy about that, and we're not happy about the service, but we're isolated, in our
everybody
hotel
is.
rooms.
What's the idea? You'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
Well, that's a condition of a slave.
Yeah, exactly. That is the condition of a slave, and you're not invested, and you're just you're just
A unit of consumption.
Yeah, and you have this temporary lease, and then it's over, and you kind of, again, like your appetite. You might as well indulge your appetites while you're here, but you're just here temporarily. So there's no kind of concept of. So I do. I think this whole. I think liberalism is totally bankrupt. We're seeing like a move. It does seem like in the last year and a half that they've moved into a new gear, and it's kind of alarming.
Well, yes, because this whole Trump thing. He's actually, as far as I can see it, he identified as nationalist and that was maybe he actually said it openly, and I read it and everything, and this, I think, constitutes a rejection of liberalism, because the tenets of liberalism are now neoconservatism and neoliberalism, and Trump and his supporters reject that and are therefore treated as heretics and domestic terrorists for daring to reject the goodies of liberalism.
And I think there's a reorientation on the right vis-a-vis the working class, because now, people have I think people have realized it was a mistake to, the sort of neoliberal policies were a real mistake, that it's been a disaster for the working class. And now we're seeing people like Trump and others who have are trying to kind of go to bat for these people. Now the problem, of course, here is that the Tories successfully managed to get, the old Labour vote, thinking that they were going to go to bat, for them, and so they got voted into power. But it's kind of a disappointment so far, I would say.
Well, I mean, that's a problem. Yeah, I think the reason why Western politicians are mostly corrupt is because they have no religion. They have no religion because I think. They stopped stopped believing in Christianity a long time ago, because as early as the 1870s, Nietzsche was already saying, "God is dead and we have killed him."
Well, it was in the 1700s. It was a very common attitude on the part of the elites. Atheism was already very, very, very popular, right?
You mean during the age of Enlightenment?
Like Voltaire and all those people. It was already that was the kind of cynical. There was a bit of a fight. Actually, there was a bit of a comeback in the 19th century with the kind of with the Anglo-Catholic movement. And there you had people like Cardinal Henry Newman and then later people like G.K. Chesterton. But this very strong kind of the progressive. The Darwinist progressive types who are this sort of like technocrat scientism. That's been a strong thread for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm afraid I have to wrap up.
Well, it's been such a pleasure, Justine. I hope
I really enjoyed it too. Thank you so much for inviting me on. Hope we can have a talk another time.
That would be great. Enjoy your dinner. What are you cooking?
We're having steak. And we're having eggplant, roast vegetables, steak. My husband's on a low carb diet right now, so it's all steak all the time around here.
Right. Well, lucky him. Enjoy your dinner, and I look forward to having another chat with you again.
Yes,
Justine.
absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.